Allahu, 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 Allah. Allahu, 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 Allah. Allahu.
Wa ala ahlihi wa sahbihi man wala. My dear brothers and sisters in Islam, welcome to yet another session of Sunnah Fix. Our goal today, inshallah, is to finish Hadith 260, and we've been studying this Hadith for quite some time now. And one of the reasons why I have been taking my sweet time is because this particular Hadith, like every sentence is like jam-packed with meaning. And I feel like I would be shortchanging y'all if I didn't do justice to the topics that are coming through. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept the effort that is put. Ameen ya Rabbal Alameen. Let us begin. Let me translate for you from the beginning what the hadith has been so far, and let's get to the last part, which is the topic of our discussion today. So if y'all recall, our Prophet ﷺ told us, narration comes to us from Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhu. Abu Hurairah, whose name is Abdul Rahman ibn Sakhr, he says that the Prophet ﷺ says that you will not enter paradise, لا تدخلوا الجنة حتى تسلموا. You will not enter paradise without Islam. You got to submit to God's rules. And you have not truly submitted until you learn to love one another. And one thing, by the way, that I forgot to mention when I was covering this particular portion, the word here the Prophet ﷺ uses for love is hatta tahabbu. He doesn't say hatta tuhibbu, which is really beautiful. If you know your Arabic, the pattern of the verb here is tafa'ul, tahabbu, which captures two things at least. Number one is it's a mutual thing, but it's a two-sided thing. In other words, at times to create love, there has to be a reciprocity that needs to take place. It's a two-way street, if you will. But also something really, really beautiful that emerges when you use the word tafa'ul or the pattern of tafa'ul. Tafa'ul comes also in the meaning of like pretending to do something, or like, you know how we say in English, fake it till you make it? As if the Prophet ﷺ is saying, sometimes it's not that easy to just love, but you have to invest in that relationship. Fake it till you make it. You know, in Arabic they say, ubku, cry. And if you can't cry, tabako, then pretend to cry. Say on the same pattern, tahabu, make an effort to love. Put some time and energy in it. Put some thought in it. You know, Stephen Covey, in his famous book, 7 Habits of the Highly Effective People, he said a man came to him and he says, you know, I don't know if I love my wife the same way anymore. The feelings have changed and it's no longer honeymoon season or whatever. So he's like, how do I get that love back again? So he tells the man, just love her. He's like, but I'm telling you, I don't have the same feelings anymore. He's like, if you want to love her, then love her. And what he's trying to capture there is, love is not just a passive feeling, it's actually an action. It's an act of service that you do, a gift that you may give, or the thought that you put into something, or like you went out of your way to spend some quality time. It's an action. It's not just a passive feeling that tends to occur, or just waves of emotions that just precipitate without any control that you exercise. So if you want to love, then love. And also part of loving somebody is that if you got some obstacles, you got some resentment that's building, then address it before it becomes a monster that consumes your entire relationship. Anywho, hatta tahabbu. The Prophet is like, love and make an effort. Even if it doesn't feel real, try until it feels genuine. And then our Prophet said, he said that spread the greetings of peace so that the seed of love can be sowed. And that's where we stopped last time. And today our Prophet ﷺ tells us the last portion of this hadith, and he's shifting gears here. And this last portion I have been thinking about for a long time. And I just hope to do justice, because this right here is something that consumes a lot of people, folks. Listen to what the Prophet says here. He says, وَإِيَّاكُمْ وَالْبُغْضَ فَإِنَّهَا هِيَ الْحَالِقَ. And beware, our Prophet ﷺ says, be careful of hatred and resentment. Why? He says because it's a haliqa. Now you know what a haliqa is, right? It's a blade. It's like a razor blade that shaves. Our Prophet says, be careful with bughda, this deep-seated hatred and resentment, because it's like a razor blade. And then he goes on to say, except that it's not shaving off your hair, it shaves off your religion. In other words, when you in modern times we say you got beef with somebody. When you beefing with somebody and you got deep-seated animosity and anger and rancor towards someone, it will compel you to do some things. They will turn you into a monster if you don't check it. And our Prophet ﷺ is saying, this is one thing that you need to be aware of. is that if you're carrying a lot of like venom in your heart against somebody, it will shoot off in ways that you can't even imagine, and it will turn you into a person you won't be able to recognize. And it will compel you to do things that you won't be proud of. You know, if you look up the meaning of the word bughda that I'm translating as resentment, pretty much all Arabic dictionaries, they translate it as ضد الحب. Bughda is the opposite of love. And Ibn Allan, he says something really profound. He says just like when someone has crush on somebody, or you got romantic love for someone, you know, after a while, when those feelings kick in, you don't have a lot of control over them. He says bughda is the same way in the negative direction. Once it kicks in, now you don't have a lot of control. You're ruminating. You're carrying all this beef and grief in your heart towards somebody, and all this hatred, the cycle of hatred that's volcanically erupting in your heart. So Islam wants to cut off the road to it, so you're catching yourself a little bit early. And my dear brothers and sisters, I don't know if you realize this, one of the top items on shaitan's agenda is what? Allah tells you in the Quran, إِنَّمَا يُرِيدُ الشَّيْطَانِ أَن يُوقِعَ بَيْنَكُمُ الْعَدَاوَةَ وَالْبَغْضَاءَ. Same word. The shaitan wants to unleash amongst you believers animosity and deep hatred. And this right here is something that you and I need to ask ourselves. Are you someone who has not talked to your brother for 20 years? You haven't spoken to your relatives in like 5 years? You're carrying this in your heart. I don't know if you realize it or not. This is that particular reality. Now, our scholars do make a little exception here. They say there's one scenario in which carrying resentment and hatred is good. And the only exception, the only time that's actually permissible, is when you are hating a particular sin that is committed publicly. So you see a person openly disobeying Allah, you know, walking all over the commands of Allah. In that situation, to hate that, that's good, because you're doing it for Allah. Not because someone's got business that's doing better than you, or they got looks that are better than you, or they got hops that are better than you. Not for some petty worldly reason. But if you're doing it for Allah, that makes sense. But even then, our scholars, they say, be careful that you're more so hating the sin and not the sinner. You hate the disease and not the patient. Why do we say this? It's because when Nuh alayhi salam is talking to his people who are committing major sins, homosexuality, what does he say? قَالَ إِنِّي لِعَمَلِكُم مِّنَ الْقَالِينَ. It's your action that I despise. Or when Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anh, in a hadith in Bukhari that's really profound, he says, after he became the Khalifa and our Prophet ﷺ has passed away, he says, revelation has stopped. We cannot x-ray people's sincerity anymore. I don't know how religious somebody is in their heart. I can't tell. He says, the only thing we're going to go off of now is your apparent actions. So if someone is doing good deeds, we're going to trust that person, and we're going to draw them closer, because that's the only thing we can objectively judge by. And we are going to leave your inner sincerity to Allah. And if someone commits evil deeds, then we're going to what? He says, فَأَبْغَضْنَاهُ عَلَيْهِ. Then we're going to hate that action upon that person. Doesn't say فَأَبْغَضْنَاهُ, then we're going to hate his guts. La 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 la. We're going to hate that action upon that person, buffering between the person and the sinner. You know why? And this is one of the main points I want to drive home today. Folks, when you hate someone with an intensity, and you're carrying this bitterness and spite in your heart, realize you're dehumanizing that person. Realize that you are now robbing that person of the basic dignity that every human being deserves. Once you reach that stage, you're going to start slowly justifying sins against them. In fact, this is an extreme example, but every genocide begins with dehumanization. Look at what they said about the Jews right before the Holocaust. They're vermins, rats, secret agents, and they have this secret agenda to take over the world. Or you look at Rwanda genocide, or any other genocide, or what Stalin did to people in the process of communizing Russia. What did they say to the bourgeoisie? These are the people who have robbed people of their private property, and these are the people who have slaved, and all sorts of charges were leveled against them until they were dehumanized. And once you dehumanize somebody, you can justify a lot of things. A lot of things. And that is something that we need to catch ourselves before it gets too far out. And my dear brothers and sisters, our Prophet ﷺ, he warned us against this. You know what he said? He says, Inna Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, hadith is in Bukhari, La tabaghadu. Don't carry anger against each other, angst. And then he says, Wala tahasadu. Be careful, because if anger gets out of control, it turns into jealousy. And then he says, وَلَا تَدَابَرُوا, don't backstab each other, creating secret plots to undermine each other. And then he says, وَكُونُوا عِبَادَ اللَّهِ إِخْوَانًا, rather be brothers for the sake of Allah. And then he gave us that famous rule, you're not allowed to abandon your brothers for 3 days. You're not allowed to be on non-talking terms with your brother for 3 days. Now there are some exceptions to that rule, which unfortunately is beyond the scope of our class today. But suffices for me to say, our Prophet ﷺ told his companions, he says, دَبَّ إِلَيْكُمْ دَاءُ الْأُمَمِ, a disease will creep up amongst you. You'll be habituated with a habit the people before you were habituated by. They're like, Ya Rasulullah, what is it? He said, Al-hasadu wal-baghda'u, jealousy and resentment. And then our Prophet ﷺ said, Hiya al-haliqa, it will shave off your religion. And you need to be careful. And going a little bit deep here, psychologically speaking, my dear brothers and sisters, psychologically we know right now, there is nothing, in no scenario is resentment that's something that benefits you. It affects your mental health. It affects the quality of your stress levels, quality of your sleep. It's hard to see a scenario where resentment actually works out for you. Sure, resentment, like any emotion, is there to help you. It gives you a message. And generally speaking, when you feel resentment towards something, is one of two things, folks. Either that resentment is sending you the message that, you know what, you need to grow up and stop whining and getting upset for no reason. So for instance, your boss is a little rough with you, and he's telling you to step up and put a higher quality in that project. Now you can get resentment. They're like, who's he to tell me what to do? He didn't respect me enough. Now here you're being a little bit of a whiner. There's a job contract. You're supposed to deliver on a few things. Now, here you might want to just mature up and grow up. Or if I'm giving my students some tough love, and I said something and I kind of gave them a little bit of a stern side of me, at that moment, instead of becoming bitter towards me, they're like, you know what, I need to step up and get a better grade. So there's one possibility. The other possibility, someone is trying to walk all over you. In that situation, you need to do something. You need to address it, because that monster is going to get bigger and bigger. This happens in relationships all the time, where husband and wife, they got some issues, and they're like, you know what, it's not worth fighting about. So they sweep it under the carpet. And then something else occurs. Oh, love conquers all, whatever, they don't address it. And next thing you know, over 2-3 years, there's like 300 issues that all went unaddressed. Resentment has now congealed into this deep bitterness until next thing you know, disasters occur. Next thing you know, you find out that someone was cheating on you, and you're shocked. They're like, how could that person be cheating on me? I'm raising this guy's kid. Yeah, for all the things that were swept under the rug that have now turned into a monster, they're coming back to bite you. You want to address those things head on. Imam Ghazali rahimahullah, he says, bughda and hiqt, this resentment that we're describing, he says, generally this occurs when you have issues with someone that make you angry, and you don't address it or you can't address it. And what happens, that anger now seeps into your psyche until it becomes deep-seated, and now it manifests itself in a variety of ways. And he tells you some of the ways this deep-seated anger and hatred comes out in. He says one of the first ways it comes out in is in jealousy, where you actually wish that that person is robbed of their success, where you're hating on that person constantly in your heart, where when that person is walking the stage, or they got a promotion, or something really worked out for them, or they made a name for themselves in their community, it bothers you, it agitates you. That's one way that bughda is coming out in. Another way that this bughda comes out in is that you enjoy seeing them fail and suffer. It kind of makes you low-key happy when you see them kind of stumbling on stage, making a fool out of themselves, or they try to give a khutbah, and you know what, they like froze on stage. It makes you happy. Or they got fired from their job, or they got a D on that exam. It makes you feel good. You need to catch yourself doing that. I always ask my students, particularly those people who have a good voice in the Quran, I'm like, look, if another qari is being praised in your presence, what's your reaction? Are you agitated? If you are, that's a sign to catch yourself in. You're a speaker, another speaker is being praised in your presence. What's your reaction? You're a student, and another student is being praised in your presence. What's your reaction? You got to catch that in your heart. Jealousy can be really sneaky, folks. So, Imam Ghazali says another way this bughda is going to come out in, you like seeing somebody fail and suffer or be embarrassed. Another way it comes out in, you're agitated in the presence of that person, so you start avoiding them. Your smile is muted. Your handshake is no longer as firm. You cannot stand that person anymore. In fact, the desire to help that person is gone. Standing up for their rights, you don't want to do it. In fact, if that person is being backbit against, or someone is clearly saying something against that person that you know is wrong, you will not defend them. Why? They're like, you know what? They deserve it. Because now your hatred is coming out in ways that you may not fully control or may not fully realize. And that's something I tell parents that, and this is a really nice rule that Jordan Peterson talks about. He says, don't let your kids do something that makes you resentful of them. And if parents don't address that in a wise manner, I'm not saying blow up on your kid, but if your kids are constantly doing things in public, you know, they're throwing tantrums in public, or in one story that I read, in the middle of a party, the kid takes a piece of bread and takes out the middle and throws away the rest. Or like dumping juice on the ground, because 6-year-old, you expect them to behave better, and the parent is so embarrassed. What's going to happen if that's not addressed properly? Now, when that child wants your attention, you don't want to give it. That hug is no longer as strong. That resentment is going to come out. You have to address it. So Imam Ghazali goes on to say, the desire to help is gone. Standing up for their rights, you don't want to do it. And then eventually that hatred, that boghda, compels you to backbite, lie against them, ridicule them, expose their secrets, and tarnish their honor. This is where now it slowly starts to shave off your religion. In fact, if you were in a position to torture them or hurt them, you probably would. The murderous rage starts to go and quadruple and compound inside of you. So, bottom line, my dear brothers and sisters, I'm asking every single one of you, scan your own personal connections. Start with your family and your friends. I'm asking you, man, who you beefing with? Who are you carrying a lot of resentment in your heart? Who's that person in your life that, you have completely ghosted them, given them a cold shoulder, and even though they have rights over you by virtue of the fact that you're family, but you have not addressed it, you got to do something. You have to address it. Our Prophet ﷺ said, "Hiya al-haliqa," it's a shaver and it shaves off our deen. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, first of all, to allow us to be people of justice. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala I ask Allah to allow us to be people of balance and moderation. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He gives us the tawfiq to do ihsan to people who have not done ihsan to us. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursaleen walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Barakallahu feekum.